You've heard of the Beckham Law, now get ready for the Mbappé Law. The French football star's signing to Real Madrid coincides with the timing of a draft piece of tax legislation that the regional government in Madrid have been working on, and as a result has been dubbed the Mbappé Law. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you what this new piece of tax legislation is all about, who can benefit from it, and my thoughts on it. Let's get right into it. If you're new here, my name is Jonny. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living and working in Spain for the past 4.5 years. I live here in Madrid as well. And as someone who takes an interest in personal finance and has had to deal with the Spanish tax system quite a few times over the past 4.5 years, I've become quite familiar with the tax system and all the nuances of it. That said, despite my familiarity with the system, this video should not be taken as professional tax advice, and always consult with a professional to understand the specifics and the nuances of your situation. So let's understand first a little bit about the context of what is behind this draft tax legislation. So in a note that the Madrid community have released where they detail all of what's going on in this draft legislation, they start by talking about a very competitive international environment in terms of attracting investment, mentioning as well that Madrid attracts 2/3 of all investment that goes into Spain. And as a growing international city and business hub, the regional government is taking another step further to try and attract international talent, investors, professionals from abroad, so that can benefit the local economy, the local businesses, and the region in general. I published a video about this a couple of months ago as well, about a lot of the things that have been going on in Madrid over the past years that have put it on the verge of being a top European city, and I'll leave the link so you can go and check that out. And so given the fact that there already exists the Beckham Law, so what is the difference with the Mbappé Law that's been brought in? Well, I see two main differences here. The first one being that the Mbappé Law is solely for residents of the Madrid community, which you'll see in a bit more details as we go into the requirements, whereas the Beckham Law can apply to anyone living anywhere in Spain. And the second is that the Beckham Law looks primarily at your earned income and is for professionals who are earning income. They're new residents in Spain, and they essentially want to benefit from a flat rate of tax while they're there, whilst having an exemption on the rest of their income from outside of Spain. Whereas with the Mbappé Law, what you'll see is that it's very much focused on investors, and yes, you'll get a tax deduction essentially on your earned income, but how much you get very much depends on what you invest. And it's basically that in order to get something, you need to give something, giving something being in the form of investing in the region. I should mention as well that at the time of recording, which is mid-July, this draft legislation for the Mbappé Law is expected to go into the Madrid Assembly, where it will be voted on. And according to various sources across the Spanish media and the Spanish press, this law is expected to be passed without any major changes, with retroactivity going back to the 1st of January 2024. All right, so what are the requirements for someone to benefit from this law? Well, the first thing is that you can't have been a resident in Spain for the 5 years prior to your arrival and to you moving to Madrid. Obviously, of course, as this is a regional piece of tax legislation, it is exclusive to the Madrid community, so you'd have to be a resident in the Madrid community. That said, the Madrid community is not just the city of Madrid. There are cities, villages, towns outside of the center of Madrid where you can live, and you'll still technically be within the Madrid community. And based on the draft legislation, you'd therefore still be eligible to benefit from this legislation. You need to make investment in certain securities that essentially are not domiciled in tax havens, and also that have a presence, some kind of operation, or even kind of their domicile in the Madrid community. Now, the types of investment that you can make that are eligible for this are somewhat broad in terms of their definition, but based on the draft legislation, it would essentially be securities that are acquired through exchanging capital to third parties, whether that be negotiated or not, in organized markets. So examples that come to mind could be buying shares in a particular company, whether they're private or public, and that company is operating or domiciled within the Madrid region. It could also be local government debt, for example, if the Madrid community is issuing government debt and you want to purchase bonds, that could also be something. Another idea that came to mind could perhaps be an investment fund that is based in Madrid. So if you want to make an investment into a fund and that fund is domiciled in Madrid, and that could perhaps also be an eligible investment. As I say, the definitions of what qualify are pretty broad, and I would definitely recommend speaking to a tax advisor to understand what investments are eligible for potential beneficiaries of this law. And whilst I haven't seen anything stated in the draft note from the Madrid community, I did see something on one source which says that you're not allowed to invest in the property sector and get the benefit that way. And so if what that source said is true, then you couldn't effectively do tax efficient property investing and benefit from this law in that sense. There's no limit and no numbers mentioned in the draft either. So there's no minimum, there's no maximum that you would need to invest in order to benefit from this. So essentially you can make whatever investment you want, but it is important that you can't hold more than 40% of the capital of a company. So you couldn't just, set up a family company just like that, be 100% shareholder and get the deduction. No, your participation is limited at 40% of the entity that you're investing in. It's important to note as well that a person investing in one of those entities could not take on a managerial, director, board role or have any kind of employment relationship with that company. You'd be restricted solely to an investor role. And to get this benefit as well, you have to make the investment in the same year that you become a resident of the Madrid community. So if you move to Madrid in 2024, you would have to make that investment in 2024. You couldn't make it a year later. And it's important that the investor holds this investment for a minimum period of 6 years. If an investor were to sell this before the end of those 6 years, then any benefits that they'd receive, any deductions would essentially no longer be applicable, and they would also have to possibly return any benefits that had been received up to that point. And so what benefits do you get if you fulfill those requirements? Well, what you essentially get is a 20% reduction or rebate, if you like, on your investment made, taking into account any transaction costs, taxes that you've needed to pay on that investment, not taking into account interest, on your autonomous community income tax. So I'm going to give you a practical example to show you how this works. Okay, so here I've got my Excel tax calculator to work out the taxes that someone would pay in the Madrid community. This is a downloadable file from my website, by the way. If you're interested in it, you can download this. So we're going to assume that this person has 200,000 euros of income. So that would mean that their approximate tax they would pay is 39,000 euros to the central government and 36,000 euros to the Madrid community. So what we're going to do is I'm going to copy this over to a new workbook that I set up just now. So I've taken those numbers, I put them in a new workbook. Let's say that the person invests 100,000 euros into one of the qualifying investments, and they have 5,000 euros in closing costs. So the total acquisition cost of 105,000 euros. We multiply that by 20%, they would essentially get a tax rebate of 21,000 euros. So given that this person is paying 35,000 euros, 36,000 euros rounding up, in the autonomous bracket for that year, they would essentially get 21,000 euro reduction on that. So in the end, they'd end up paying 15,000 euros that year because they got the rebate from their investment. Let's take another example. Let's make the value a bit higher. So we make it 500,000 euros. So in this case, the tax rebate is 101,000 euros, which is actually greater than the regional tax that the person would pay. So essentially for the first year, they would pay no autonomous community income tax. They'd still have the government tax to pay, as in the previous example, but no autonomous tax. And this tax benefit, important to know, you can benefit from it for up to 6 years. So essentially, after the first year, the person has had 35,700 euros of that benefit. So going into the second year, they'll still have 65,000 euros of balance, if you want to call it that, to benefit from over the next 6 years. Assuming the person makes the same money, if we take the 500,000 euro example, then that person would essentially pay zero income tax in the second year, and then in the third year, they would end up paying about 5,000 euros in tax, because that would be the point when essentially the total balance ran out. So as you can see, based on the size of an investment that a person makes, how much money they earn, all that kind of stuff, a lot of factors play into what kind of tax benefit you'd get here and for how long you get that tax benefit for. But that's kind of the maths behind it, what I just showed you there. So let me give you my thoughts on it now. I think it's a very interesting move from the Madrid regional government. Especially as they say in their note, they want to stay competitive. They want to bring people to Madrid. And it's definitely an interesting approach to do that. And looking at the maths as well, you can see it's very beneficial. Like if we take the first example, like no rebate, you're paying effectively like a 39-40% overall tax rate based on the numbers that I had. And then if you're making a big enough investment to get your autonomous rate down to zero autonomous community tax, then that's effectively bringing the rate with those numbers down to 21%. So you're paying like half of what you would have paid before. What I am curious to understand though is more about the types of eligible investment here, because as I say, the definitions are a bit broad, but If property is ruled out, as I understand it is from reading one source, then it's perhaps a bit restrictive in terms of what companies, what funds you can invest in. But at the same time, it's understandable because the goal, of course, is for this to benefit the local economy, companies and businesses operating in Madrid and to help the wider region as a whole, as I mentioned throughout the video. I think there is perhaps an argument for leaving property out of this because Madrid and Barcelona are such dynamic property markets, as I've explored in other videos on the channel. I think if this was opened to properties, there would potentially be a big influx of property investment in the Madrid community. And I think that could possibly cause an undesirable and perhaps even tense situation within the region if that were to go ahead. So if property is left out, as I've understood it is, then I can understand the reasoning behind it. It is worth noting though, at the end of the day, it's still an investment. And whilst it's well and good trying to attract international investors to the region, then there should be some attractive assets with attractive returns on offer as well. Now, besides my home and my 2 storage units that I have, I can't personally say that I've invested in securities specifically tied to the Madrid community. So it's difficult for me to give it an evaluation on that. But I think for an investor who is looking at investing in the region, then of course, do your due diligence and look into whether it's a profitable investment. And keep in mind, of course, that any investment in securities in the Madrid region, the capital gains, the dividends, the interest, whatever you earn from that investment is still taxed under the Spanish tax system as base de ahorro, which is like the savings base. Not taxed like your personal income, but still taxed nevertheless. And those brackets, depending on what the gains are, can range from 19 up to about 27%. So something to keep in mind. So those are my thoughts, guys. And there you have your explanation about the new Mbappé law. I hope you found it helpful and interesting. Leave a comment and let me know what you think of this initiative and if you think it will be beneficial overall for the Madrid community. And if you're interested in checking out some of the videos that I mentioned along the way, be sure to check out my video on why Madrid could be one of Europe's next up-and-coming big cities, and be sure to check out my video where I've talked about the Spanish property market as well. Till next time, I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money.